We're about to begin our first session, and the moderator of the first session is Dr. Holly Huntz, who is a faculty member at Montana State University. So Holly, come on out, and she's going to introduce the speakers of the first session.
While I have the microphone, I wanted to take a minute to thank Mindy for her leadership. I've had a real honor sitting on the planning committee for the last year, and at one of our last meetings, I kind of joked, but not really, that it was a meeting I looked forward to. It was just a incredible group of people, and normally I think many of us look at a meeting on our calendar, we're like, oh geez, but this was a meeting that I always look forward to, and I'm honored and very humble to be up here. We have three talks, 4 speakers, and then an elder response. And these are all people that I've admired their careers for some time, so it's really humbling to be introducing them. But our first speakers, are they here? Yay, okay. Do you want to go ahead and come on up? The topic is Transformational Eating, a Ceremony of Gratitude, and the 2 speakers are Abigail Echo Hawk and Elizabeth Echo Hawk-Kawe, and I wanted to share just a very brief story. One of the first, when I decided in my career that I was going to start a real focus on food sovereignty and nutrition, Abigail is one of my first phone calls I made, and I was very nervous at my desk with a phone. I'm like, I can do this, okay. And I phoned her, and she couldn't have been more kind or supportive. So when I read through her bio, and it stated that she really believed in traditional values of love and acceptance, I thought, well, that is true. I can tell you that for sure. So I was told by Mindy to be very brief, which I will be, so I want to turn the platform over. Abigail is the director of the Urban Indian Health Institute at the Seattle Indian Health Board, and Elizabeth is the director of Indigenous Wellness for Headwater People in Seattle, Washington. And with that, I will turn over the microphone.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
We're so excited to be here. You guys didn't know, but the people who sat in the very front row were going to get a door prize. I joke. There's no door prize, but there's nobody in the front row. So if you want a door prize, show up at my workshop. T-shirts for everybody. No, I'm joking. We were really excited to be here and a little bit nervous about coming and being in an auditorium like this. So I can't see the people in the very back, but know that we love you, we support you, and we hope to see you a little bit closer at the next session. Again, I'm very excited to be here. Before we start and I introduce my sister and I first want to say just an abundance of gratitude and thanks to the first peoples of this land, the Shakopee Mdewakanton community. When we got off the plane and drove here, when we stepped out onto the land, we were greeted by those at the front. We were greeted by those who helped us to our room, and since we've been here. And when I think about why we come and we sit at our tribal communities and we breathe the air that our ancestors breathed here 1,000 years ago, and we breathe then that gratitude and that thanks, that welcoming, the welcoming to your land, and we appreciate being able to stand here on your land today. And we want you to know that as sisters, as Echo Hawks, as Pawnee Athabascan women, that we come here with the greatest of intentions. And we bring those intentions for the health and well-being of our people, and we feel that here in this community, that the health and well-being of your people through your economic development, We feel that and we appreciate that. So thank you very much for being able to come, to be on your land, to breathe that air of your ancestors, to feel that ancestral knowledge, that ancestral wisdom, and to know we are in a place of where our ancestors not only survived, but thrived with resilience through the actions that have allowed all of us to be here today. So, got that done. We're so excited to be here. I'm Abigail Echo Hawk. I am the daughter of Howard and Yvonne Echo Hawk. My father is currently living in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where we are the grandchildren of Whitty and Christabel Echo Hawk of Oklahoma, of Pawnee, Oklahoma. You may notice we do not have that deep Oklahoma drawl, and I'll tell you why. We were born and raised in the heart of Alaska amongst our mother's people in the Mentasta Lake, near the Mentasta Mountains, where we were blessed to grow in compassion, hope, love, resilience, and the knowledge that where we come from, our bloodlines that extend deeper than time itself, has sustained our people since time immemorial. So we are of the Athabascan people on our mother's side, as the daughters of Yvonne Echo Hawk, the granddaughters of Katie John of Mentasta Lake, Alaska. And I am so just blessed to be here today with my sister. We're two of 8 siblings, and I always say we're not interdependent, but more healthily dependent on each other. And it isn't very often that we get to come and to present together. And so we are so excited, and I want to extend my gratitude to Mindy and the team for allowing us to come here and to talk today a little bit different than what is normally talked about when we talk about nutrition and we talk about research. So I'm going to pass it on to my sister, Elizabeth.
Yeah, I just want to say again how honored and blessed I am just to be in this room full of such amazing people I admire and people that I may slightly stalk. Yeah, I'm just really in awe, and I just feel just so connected to this journey that we're all on to see our communities well. And just a little bit about myself. I'm a nutritional therapist, and I live on Hawk-Kawe, the Big Island of Hawaii, and I've lived there for the last 16 years. And I've been honored to be a part of a small community in the north part of the Big Island, North Kohala, and never thought in 100 years growing up in Alaska that I would be married to a Maori from New Zealand and farming in Hawaii. So it's been an interesting journey, and one that I've been really blessed to be a part of. And I carry with me my daughters and my family as they stand here with us as we share this morning.
So as we were thinking about how and what we would want to talk about, it's been a conversation that we have had in our family, in our community, and I know many of you have had in your communities, whether it be nonprofits, working in academia, working as tribal leadership. I was so excited to see so much tribal leadership here today. And very often, we approach it from the sense of, particularly in a conference like this, where there's a lot of researchers here. We talk about, nutrition. We talk about numbers. We talk about often it's like, well, we have this number of people who are obese. We have this number of people who have food insecurity. And I'm somebody who loves numbers. And I'm actually right now, I serve as the director of the Urban Indian Health Institute. It's one of 12 tribal epicenters across the United States. I work across the country as the only one working with urban Indian populations, so tribal people who currently live off tribal lands in different urban settings. And it's been very difficult to come together and think, how do we bring the traditional values and the knowledge and strengths of who we are to what it means to impact the health and well-being of our people through nutrition. So here in this picture you see where Liz and I come from. Those are our waters where our feet always remain. Those are the mountains that our eyes never leave. How do we translate that into what it means to improve the health and well-being of our people? So I'm going to start with a story. I have worked in research for many years. I've been very blessed to work on numerous research studies, everything from suicide prevention to nutrition to child home visiting in Indian country for many years. I remember the first time that I ever went home after working then at the University of Washington, where I was working for one of the biggest medical grants in the country. And I went home and I did a presentation in Alaska, and I invited my family and I invited my relatives. And afterwards, I was so proud of myself. And so I had, for the very first time, I was going to buy everybody dinner too, because I finally had money to pay for the whole family to go to dinner. And I was sitting next to one of my uncles, and I was like really proud of myself. And I was like, "Hey, uncle, what did you think?" And he's like in the middle of, he'd been making fun of the food. He'd gotten some kind of like puffed pastry that came out shaped like a fish, and he couldn't get over it. And he's like, "Why did they waste all this time to make it look like a fish? I just wanted a pie." And he'd been joking the whole time, and he was lifting up, his bite of his pastry, and he turned and looked at me, and he kind of smiled, and he said to me, he said, "You don't speak Indian no more." It just shook me to my core. And I really had to think, what does it mean? What did he mean that when he listened to me get up and talk about my academic research, the studies that I was doing with our people, and he told me, "You don't speak Indian no more"? And I thought about my uncle, because we grew up next to each other. He was like a father to me. I was raised with his children. And as a kid, I always used to joke around, because we always used to kind of joke around, because he would always tell us, we always had to go get his shoes. But he speaks what we call in Alaska village English. And so he would always say, "Go get my shoe." And in my little 8-year-old heart, I'd be like, "Oh, shoes, uncle." But what was I really judging? We know now through some research studies that have looked at village English in Alaska that actually the way that we talk English is holding on to the same way that we would have spoken our traditional language. To my uncle, why would his feet be disconnected? That is why he said shoe. It took this realization of, I didn't speak Indian no more, because I had changed my language, the way of being and the way of working my people to fit the Western ideas of academic research and science. Is that who we have to be? When here today, we talk about nutrition, where we have amazing people from the University of Minnesota, University of North Dakota. I have all these friends and colleagues here. How do we bring back our tradition, language, way of being into talking about nutrition, science? How are you speaking Indian to your people when you try to bring them back to those traditional ways of health and well-being? I recently collaborated with an artist, John Pepian, a Blackfeet artist, because with my organization, I wanted to represent how are we feeling? What are we doing that's different? And this is the perspective that we bring to you today. So I'm going to completely oversimplify ledger art. So for those of you who are much more knowledgeable, I apologize for making it short. But ledger art, as you see it up there today, came from our people who are being held and moved from one area to the other as they relocated them from one area to the other. And during the winters, they had locked them up in stockades and barns, and they gave them a whole bunch of old ledgers to draw on to kind of keep them occupied while they were being held while the coldest parts of the winter were happening before they could keep moving them. And what did our people do? What have we always done? We have taken things that other people can't imagine moving past, and we turn them into something full of beauty. So in this piece of ledger art, ledgers that can contain numbers, people, guns, taking away of land, counts of cattle. In this, we reclaim that. We take those numbers back. I love a good bar chart like Mindy just showed. Oh, show me bar charts all day. I love them. It's what I do. We reclaim those, and instead we come and we interpret them with the full knowledge and regalia of our ancestors. At our feet, for the Pawnee people, our first mother was that corn. My auntie in Oklahoma, our seed keeper, knows every kernel of corn because we have always looked at information, analyzed it, and done what is best for the health and well-being of our people. So that corn lays at your feet, those next generations, those young ones. With it also lies that traditional strength, knowledge, and nutrition that comes from those traditional foods. But what we do is we take the strengths of Western culture to decolonize data, to decolonize research. So you can follow me, hashtag decolonize data. And I remember one thing, I think it was Tiffany actually said to me, she's like, oh, decolonize data, that's such a colonizing thing to say. I was like, you are so right. It is. For us, though, how do we feel it? I can make a non-Indian person understand decolonized data, but how do we feel it? How do we interpret it? How do we go back to our roots of who we are and think about what it meant for our ancestors to live full, healthy, nutritious lives?
So I was here last year, and it was amazing. I walked away so inspired and in awe of the things that were happening and what people were doing across our nation and in our communities. And there was a few highlights, and one of them was listening to our elder, Faith Spotted Eagle. And for those of us who were here last year, and for those of you who weren't here, one of the things that she did, and I just thought it was amazing, and my sister plans on being like her when she's older, she stood up in front of everybody and she flipped the whole auditorium off. I'm not going to do it to you because I'm not an elder. But she flipped you double bird, and she's like, what do you feel? And she started talking about this red rage that is a part of who we are. And I'm sitting in there and I was listening to her and I was thinking, oh, that's so funny, like other people have red rage. I'm good, I'm living in Hawaii, very rootsy, and, when we speak, it's on grass outside, and, I'm in the dirt, and I'm eating healthy, and I'm good. About a half hour later, there was this incident, and oh my gosh, I flipped from being this rootsy girl, all happy and with nutrition and life, to being so angry. And this incident happened around, I felt of an injustice of people not being heard and listening to, and I just was shaking inside. I had to leave. And it was within minutes of this conversation of hearing Faith Spotted Eagle talk about this red rage that is in us, and it's been a part of our journey. And she said, it doesn't matter if I'm so angry, these amazing things that you're doing in our communities. If I'm so angry, it doesn't matter what I'm eating. Do I care? So what is nutrition? What is nutrition for my community? What is nutrition for when I say to my cousin in Alaska, in a rural village, 7 miles off of the highway, 50 miles away from the nearest grocery store, that you need to eat healthier, you need to have better nutrition. How does that make her feel? How does that connect her to her food, to her story? Does it draw her into this? Or is this a word that is not a part of her story? How do we see nutrition? How do we see food? How did our people see food? And when we're operating out of a lot of trauma and stress, how do we receive these gifts that the planet gives us, the earth gives us? So I was reminded of this story. This is my grandmother, and I couldn't find a picture, the one I wanted, and so this is my little brother. And I was about 10 years old, and I remember going out with my same uncle and some other uncles and aunties. It was night. I think it was night. It was in the middle of Alaska, so it could have been 3 in the afternoon, and I would have think it was night, and in the wintertime. And there was snow on the ground, we go off the side of the road, and there was a moose. And they give us each a knife, and they're teaching us how to take this moose apart. I remember them cutting it open to gut it and taking everything out of the intestines and saying, we're going to use these parts, we're not wasting anything. And I remember being there and listening, and it was the first time that I'd ever actively been a part of taking apart a moose. Had eaten moose, I'd received moose, and one of my favorite foods and as a kid. And I remember them splitting us up, and I got to be with my uncle, who always teased me. He said that he found me in a village. I'm not going to say the name of the village, but it's a village that we kind of have, little stuff with. And he said he found me in this village and wrapped up in paper towel in an oldie box. And he decided that my parents needed me, and that's where I was from. But so he always liked to tease me. And I remember, I think in his head, he must have thought it was funny. And he goes, okay, Liz, everybody was having to take different parts apart. Some people were taking the legs. And he goes, okay, we're going to do the head. And you can choose, do you want to cut the tongue out or do you want to cut off the nose? And I'm like, oh, I think it's probably easier to cut a tongue out than to cut around the nose. So it's like, I'm going to do the tongue, Uncle. So I have this knife, and I remember it was a harder job than I thought it was going to be. And I cut this tongue out of this moose. And the next question he asked me was like, okay, who are you going to give that to? Who are you going to give that tongue to? I said, I'm going to give this tongue to Grandma. And he said, okay, that's good. So the next day, I come to Grandma, this moose tongue wrapped in a plastic bag, and I give it to her, and I'm like, Grandma, I got you a moose tongue. And I remember her touching my face and looking in my eyes and saying, oh, Elizabeth, thank you. Thank you. And in that moment, I felt such love, I felt such gratitude, I felt well. And it wasn't just the nourishment of the moose that she was going to end up sharing with the other elders around this meal that is centered around this moose tongue. It was a moment that I felt nourished.
So when we were preparing for this talk, Liz called me up and she said, I feel like I want to share this story, but she's like, we're talking about old stories. And I was thinking about, Liz, that is an old story. That knowledge of gifting, giving, receiving, what the Mdewakanton and Shakopees have given us here, that gift of a beautiful place, that giving and receiving has always been who we are. And very often, as we talk about science, research, nutrition, it's culture versus science. Well, this is what science says we need to do. This is what your evidence-based practice says. And from your communities, you'll know, well, that doesn't always work in my community. It would need to be adapted this way. So we often hear and often feel this, well, it's science versus culture. Is that the way that it has to be? How do we change that? How do we change the story? And when we think about it, our culture has always been science. So when we do research studies, we always talk about scientific rigor. And it's as boring as that sounds. I'll make it more interesting. If you're a Star Wars fan, there's this part with Han Solo where he's like in the crypt, whatever that is, and he's like stuck like this. That's what scientific rigor means, is that we use the best Western methodologies. Even the words I'm saying sound boring. We use the best statistical analysis. We do all of these things that Western science tells us. And we often do not make room for the cultural pieces. So instead, what we should be doing is challenging this idea that scientific rigor is what we have to do to make nutrition science. Instead, as cultural people, as Indigenous peoples, ground ourselves in cultural rigor. What does that mean? It means you look at the community. You are guided by the wisdom and the knowledge of the elders as the tribal leadership so designs. You make sure that all of your research is regulated by the tribal communities. You have respect for Indigenous data sovereignty. How do we ground ourselves in cultural rigor and instead recognize that our culture always was science? So in this picture, I was recently in Alaska, and I had been, for those of you who run organizations and have to write a lot of grants, I was in grant writing hell. It went like one after the other, and I was exhausted. And I called my mom, and I was talking with some people. I said, I just need to go home. I just need to hear the wind in the trees. I just need to remember why and who I am and why I do this. So I went home. My uncle, when he heard I was coming, he took a 2-day trip to go up to our fish wheel where we collect our salmon, and he brought back 15 salmon for my children and I, because he wanted my kids to learn how to fillet fish, cut fish, smoke fish, and help him put together his our smokehouse with our very traditional racks from the oven we took from my mom's house. And he taught my children those things. An elder, he's 74 years old. He's a survivor of the boarding school era. He's a survivor of the Vietnam War. And the most important thing he taught them was not how to fillet the fish, how to clean the fish, how to cut in so that the fish smoke correctly, what kind of wood to use, how to keep the wood at a certain area. That's not the most important thing. As he was teaching them how to cut the fish, he told them, be careful, cut the heads this way. Fillet the salmon this way and carefully remove the eggs. Take the heads, set them aside, because I'm going to take them up for our elders who are in the pioneer home, as they call it. And I want them to be able to have these traditional foods. And I thought, wow, my elder, 74 years old, caring for his elders, teaching my children that the most important thing that they do is not learning how to smoke the fish, not learning how to fillet the fish, but learning how to give and to also receive the gifts that he was giving them. Our culture always was science. What does it mean when we have that gratitude, that way of being and knowing?
So to a little bit of the science, what happens to the brain when we introduce these amazing stories of gratitude. This is my cousin. Her name's Catherine Martin. She's up in Alaska right now, and I called her before using this photo, and I said, hey, Catherine, can I use this picture of you smoking some salmon? And she looked at it, and she's like, yeah. She said, where are you sharing it at? I said, I'm going to be in Minnesota. She's like, let them know I'm a Vikings fan. So she is a Vikings fan. I needed to let you know that. And she's our older cousin, so we have to listen to her. And those of you who may know Catherine, she's the boss, so you got to listen to Catherine. And I just look at this picture and I see such joy, and I see such peace, and I see wellness, and I see somebody rooted. And what happens in the brain, and for me, I feel like we cannot talk about nutrition without talking about how we digest and how we receive the nutrients that we're receiving, the receiving of these gifts, and what happens in our bodies. So, when we're operating in that red rage, or when we're operating in this stressful to stress, there's a flight and fight response. It's part of our nervous system. It's called the sympathetic nervous system, and I'm not going to get too technical with all of those words, but when we're in that flight or fight response, our body is ready to either run to survive. So when that happens, our digestive systems shut down. They stop working, and they can absorb minimally some of the nutrients that we may be ingesting, some of the gifts we may be receiving. But we're not receiving them fully. We're not able to receive these gifts and honor them to their full capacity. And what happens when we use these acts, our traditional stories, our traditional ways to connect to those stories, to connect to the feel of your grandmother's hands on your face, as she receives and she gives back to you. When we connect to those stories of gratitude, our whole body, the system changes to this, it's called a parasympathetic or relaxed state. And in that state, lots of amazing things happen to our body. Blood pressure drops, the immune system rises, just some amazing things, and one of them is our body's digestive system starts to receive. It starts to be able to receive the gift of these nutrients. And it's an amazing gift that we're given by able to receive when we become into these acts of gratitude.
So our culture was science. Our people knew that when you give and you receive, when you act in that times of gratitude, that reciprocal giving and receiving, that food absorbs into our bodies into ways so that uncle teaching those young ones to care for those fish eggs, to give to those elders, that was nutrition. And I currently work, as I said, the director of the Urban Indian Health Institute. I moved to Seattle when I was 18 years old. I was soon pregnant after that, got married soon after that. And I remember my very first year living in Seattle, which is expensive to live in. My husband and I, jointly together, made $7,200. We were poor. We were really poor, and we were surviving. And I remember being on public benefits, doing what I could with my food stamps, and I was in such a state of anxiety that I would just sometimes be like, oh God, I don't know if I'm gonna get these next month. I'm gonna go buy everything I can that will fit into my freezer. How many of you work with people who are just like me? I see so many hands raised. And I think then, and actually I now work at the Seattle Indian Health Board, who gave so much to me. It provided me this sacred space that recognized me as a Native person, who gave me my first car seat, who did all of these things for me, that allowed me to be thankful for those gifts, to be able at times to see past that overwhelming poverty that I was in, to be able to see my path forward for me and my children. And I think about that resilience. And so some people may have heard me say this before. If you look up resilience in the dictionary, it's a noun. It's a thing. For us as Indian people, resilience is not a noun. Resilience is every action that we do now. The fact that you are sitting here today is resiliency. You are the resiliency of your people. Liz is the tangible manifestation of the resilience of our Pawnee people, who in 1910, there was less than 700 of us. We are their resilience. We teach those lessons and we move forward. And here you see a picture of some blueberries that I gathered when I was in Alaska. And I think about us as these plants. So we live in a part of Alaska that's the coldest, so it got to 74 below zero last year. And it also got to 100 degrees this summer. And as a result of that, research has shown us that these blueberries, which our ancestors have always used as nutrition throughout the entire year, has some of the highest antioxidants and nutrients in them. Because that blueberry survives in the harshest of conditions and blooms and grows and cares for the people as an act of resiliency. That action that we take, that gifting and receiving. So when I was in Alaska recently, they were like, oh, you're gonna go pick blueberries. We have these new scooper things you can use. And I know that these particular things that you use, when you scoop them, it damages the plant. And it takes 2 or 3 years for that blueberry plant to recover before it can grow fruit again, before it can grow berries again. What is our responsibility to gathering of a harvest? That takes into responsibility, for me, it would have been a lot easier to take that. But instead, I did what my uncle taught me, my relatives taught me, and I picked with both hands. Always in action, always in resiliency. That is the strength of who we are, where we're going, and where when we think about nutrition, and we think about the resiliency of like myself, $7,200 in a city where rents run about $2,000 for a one-bedroom. Sometimes just those acts of resiliencies, those gifts of generosity of those who were giving me these amazing services, what were life-changing to what we were doing. I'm going to skip this because we're running out of time. So, in closing, because I know we only have a few more minutes left.
So it's how do we connect? How do we connect to those gifts? And why is this story of gratitude and these stories of receiving and giving, why is it an important part of this journey to wellness for our communities? And I like that word wellness because it's not just what we're eating; it's how we're dealing with stress in our body. It's this wellness, and how are we connected? How are we connecting to the food that we're receiving? Is it in an honorable way? And we may be an honorable way of how we maybe harvest the food. We may be able to be, right now I'm in a space in Hawaii where the other night before I came, we went up to traditional Hawaiian lo'i with a group of people that have just really loved me, and I've become part of their family, and we work in this traditional lo'i together, and we harvested, and we came home, and this uncle came and he dropped off this wild beef that he had just killed up in the mountains in Kohala, and he gave us a leg of this beef, and then some friends from across the street drop off star fruit and dragon fruit, and we put this meal together just organically of everything on our plates was harvested that day. And I was just like, oh my God, like this is amazing. And I was just like, oh, this is just an awesome experience. But in reality, it's not always like that, right? In reality, it's my kids trying to find something that they'll eat in the morning for breakfast, and people that live in Hawaii, Spam musubi is not the best of nutrient things to be giving to your children in the morning, but sometimes that happens. And how do we, when we feel like we don't have control over all of the things we're eating, how do we start to just the sustainable step of actually just getting into a place of being able to receive and to honor these gifts, to honor these foods as we start to eat them. And I feel like when we start walking in these steps and walking in these stories, the stories of gratitude, our bodies start to change, they start to become well, and the choices that we make, when we can make them, they start to change as well too.
So as she said, not everybody is always going to have that opportunities. We know we are very blessed to grow up in a hunting and subsistence lifestyle. We know that that is not capable for everybody. And in the urban cities that I work in, not all of our people have that same access. But what they do have access to is all of you. So what is our opportunity as practitioners, as researchers, as those who run organizations who work in tribal leadership, to begin to practice and begin that healing steps? I always think Dr. Warren, he always says something that always resonates with me, that we have to, in order to reach equity, we have to walk through truth. Walking through truth has to recognize the trauma that our people have experienced as a result of colonialism, of continuing racism, of continuing prejudice. How do we begin to heal our people, recognize our trauma, walk through the healing to be in that place of gratitude? Because I stand here today not as the director of an organization, but as a mother, as a daughter, as a granddaughter. How do we reach that place of gratitude, that place of healing? And when you come to your people, how do you talk Indian to them? How do you bring the strength of your ancestors, that when you step on the ground outside, that land knows who you are? It knows your name. Walk in gratitude. Sometimes I recognize in myself where I thought, oh, holy crap, man, did I just screw up? Also, allow yourself to make mistakes. Be kind to your people when they come back to your communities after they've been in academic institutions that tried to take the Indian out of them. Teach your people to speak Indian again. Do it in kindness. Do it in compassion. Recognize that our resilience and our strength comes from our connection to each other. We stand here as sisters. We stand here as community members. We stand here as people who have decided that our radical act against all of the things that have oppressed us is love. Act in love today. And as you go through this conference, receive the gift of every presenter that comes. Be in gratitude. So we just were, I know we're totally over time, long-winded Echo Hawks, you can look us up. I'm sure there's like a whole Twitter feed about that. But we wanted to end this with a gift to all of you. And this is a blessing song. It's an Athabascan song. And I just want to let you guys all know, because this is also very important, that every story we shared with you today, every song, every word that we said, we consulted with our elders and we received permission for every story that we said, including this song from our community to share. Because when we share with you this ceremony of gratitude, this is how we transform eating, how we transform our nutrition.
Yeah. Aaliyah, 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 Aaliyah,
Oh. So, decolonizing data, one of my favorite things, and if you come to my workshop, I'll actually talk a little bit more about this. When we look at information and data is collected, often from the Western ideas is they look at us from a deficit basis. They want to see how weak we are. So these number of people are obese. This number of people are in poverty. This number of people are unemployed on the reservation. How do we instead begin to look at strength-based ways of information and data in our communities? And a very specific example, what I'm working on right now, is some information we have on suicide on urban Indian youth across the country. When we looked at that data, we saw that our Native kids were at higher risk for suicide attempts. But my team and I went back and we took a look and it's like, well, what are the strength-based factors? And what we actually saw in that data is our youth, our urban Indian youth, were not as likely to make a second attempt. And we could see the strength-based interventions that we know are part of who we are. Being able to talk to elders, being able to have people outside of their family that they could talk to, being able to see themselves in the future. So when I talk about decolonizing data, it requires us to change the way that we look at it. Where are the strengths in our community? Those strengths are what have allowed us to continue and to stay in our communities today. That is using the cultural rigor. That is recognizing that within our communities comes the strength and resiliencies. And you know what? I was just in Washington, D.C. and shared this with Health and Human Services on a panel that was on. I was like, you know what? You need to come to our communities to learn what strength-based things are happening in our communities that could help you with your youth suicide problems in other populations of people. The answers are in our communities. When we recognize that, the other communities should be coming to us for the answers that we have, not coming to us because we think we have the most problems. For me, that is decolonizing data.
We have time for one more question.
I'll leave that one to you.
I'm
halfway there. No, I joke.
So I saw. She's a quarter. I'm not judging. So this journey kind of happened with me last year. After the thing, I was like, let's just, I started thinking about this and I have to admit, we're kind of in very natural farming and organic farming sort of situation that's happening in Hawaii and the north side. And it's like, oh, this is so exciting. I just want to see this in our communities in Alaska and, growing and all these things. And I was talking to my brother-in-law who was a wayfinder. He's a captain for one of the canoes out of New Zealand, traditional sailing for one of the Maori canoes. His name's Hawk-Kawe, and he started talking to me about wayfinding and about if we are off. He said, if I'm off on a course by just a degree, he said in a certain amount of time and space, I'm going to be I could miss where I want to go. I can miss this island, or I could miss wherever I'm trying to go. And I started thinking about that as in wellness, and switch the flip a little bit. If we can get to a place, because not always being able to, maybe being under a lot of stress, you know, when I get angry, it's like a flip and a switch. Like during that time, I thought, oh, I'm fine, and then just something little happens, and it's just like, if we can get to a place of so we call it a ceremony of gratitude, of actually taking the time prior, making it a ceremony, making it a part of our lives, making it a part of when we look at the food that we're about to eat, say we're talking about food, and we make this part a part of our lives again. You look at it and you feel like, and you honor it. It is a way of starting to heal our bodies and our brains. So there's amazing things with gratitude that it starts to, it triggers these feel-good hormones. One of them is dopamine. And dopamine, there's some amazing studies around dopamine, and dopamine triggers the hypothalamus, which is in charge of, or helps dictate what we eat, how we sleep, and what we drink. And the other part that dopamine triggers is the reward center of our brains. And so when we do that act, we walk in that act, make ourselves start to connect and to be able to be a place to receive and healing and to gratitude, our body wants to do it again. And it starts to create new neural pathways in the brain. It's this really amazing thing, and it starts to heal the brain in a real way, starting to create new ways of thinking and new ways of dealing with those moments of rage.
And the trauma in our communities isn't, often when we say historical, people think 100 years back. Historical is 1 second ago from when I just talked. So we have to recognize the ongoing trauma in our communities and that we experience ourselves. And so I feel, for me personally, that as I have experienced the same things that Liz has had, I recently was in a big meeting and my scientific director, I was like, you have to answer all these because I'm so mad they do not want me to say anything. Is I have to recognize those times and go back to those healing practices. And you know what? I take deep breaths. And I think about in our village that we do these, they call them steam baths. It's very similar to sweats. It's a little bit different. But we would always learn that you need to deep breathe. The science around deep breathing talks about how it calms you, how it's a stress reliever. Those are practices that help me move in from that red rage into gratitude. And it is a traditional way of being that was taught to us in these steam baths, similar to Sweat Lodge, passed down from grandmother to grandchild since time began. So those traditional practices are our ways of moving forward and healing.
Thank you so much for all of your wisdom.